Long before the first European slave ships dropped anchor off the coast of West Africa, Arab slavers carried on an extensive trade in human cargo that reached deep into the continent's interior. The enslavement of millions of Africans by Arab merchants continued long after the practice had been abolished elsewhere, and some human rights experts say slavery remains a particular source of bitterness in Sudan's long civil war, where cultural, ethnic, religious, and linguistic differences between Arabs and Africans are sharp. Joyce Davis is the deputy foreign editor for the Night Reader News Service in Washington. She says slavery is at the heart of a divide between North and Sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, clearly, the origins go back to the issue of slavery, and I think to the role that Arab merchants may have played in that slave trade. That is clearly one of the outstanding grievances that black Africans would have against Arabs.
Most Arabs share a second identity as Africans. In fact, Egypt, the most populous Arab nation, is located in North Africa. But many Egyptian Arabs do not strongly identify with the rest of the continent. And while many complain bitterly about the treatment of the Palestinians by Israel, few have expressed similar sentiments about the bloody civil war being waged next door against non-Arab, non-Muslim southern Sudanese by the country's brutal Muslim and Arab-dominated government.
The allegations are that they have sought to control and to dominate Africans who are in the southern portion of the country. This is something I think around the world that has been pretty much condemned, what has been going on there. And yet you also know that there are issues inside that country that have to deal with their own peculiar cultural problems. But still, this is what has gone on in Sudan has been an example of the divide, the Arab-African divide.
Today's atmosphere of resentment and mistrust between North Africans and Sub-Saharan Africans is a far cry from the political solidarity of a generation ago. One of the leading figures of that time was Egypt's charismatic president, Gamal Abdel-Nasser. Nasser embraced his dual identity as an African and an Arab, and during his era, Cairo became the unofficial capital of Africa's anti-colonial movement. But the solidarity of the common struggle was gradually replaced by the awkwardness of relations between independent African and Arab nations. The steep rise in oil prices in the 1970s created a huge gap between many oil-rich Arab countries and many poor nations in sub-Saharan Africa. Mustafa Al-Sayed is an Egyptian academic and a visiting fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He says plans to share the oil wealth of North African and other Arab states with Africa did not occur.
In 1977, there was an African-Arab summit, held in Cairo, and Arab countries promised to provide financial help to African countries, and I think African countries, and I share this feeling, feel disappointed that the Arabs did not provide as much support to African countries as African countries wanted, and also this kind of support went mostly to to African Muslim countries.
But perhaps the largest threat to Afro-Arab ties is the sudden emergence of a non-African Arab, alleged terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden. The Saudi militant has been blamed for the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, in which hundreds of non-Arab and non-Muslim Africans were killed or wounded. Some Africans point to the support by some within the Arab world for the attacks as an example of the alleged historical disregard for African lives. Former ambassador to Zimbabwe Robert Keeley said Africans should not feel singled out by the attacks in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam.
The reason they chose those two places, I think, had very little to do with their being in Africa. I think they were vulnerable. They were easy targets.
Geography, history, and fate have placed Africans and Arabs together, not only as neighbors, but also as members of the same family. If their governments can lead the way, perhaps both North and Sub-Saharan Africans will realize their goal of a unified and prosperous Africa. I'm Sunni Khalid for Africa Journal.